Welcome to our Playwell podcast. My name is Sherry Morgan and I am the Director of Projects at Play Scotland, the national organisation for play. Today our Play Pedagogy Officer, Fiona Kirkland, speaks to Becky Wilkinson-Quinn. Becky is the Clinical Lead for Scotland at Place to Be, a mental health charity, and is responsible for their work in secondary schools. Rebecca is a registered art psychotherapist and clinical supervisor with over 20 years' experience working with children and young people in school settings. I hope you enjoy their conversation.
Welcome to the Play Scotland Playwell podcast. Hi everyone, I'm Fiona, the Play Pedagogy Officer at Play Scotland, and I'm joined today by Becky Wilkinson-Quinn from Place to Be. They are the leading children's mental health charity, and Becky is the clinical lead for Scotland and has been with Place to Be for, I think, 18 years of their 30 years in existence. Becky spent 20 years as an art psychotherapist, and so she brings an absolute wealth of experience, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today around play and emotional experience. So to start off, Becky, before we dive into the really big topics around mental health and play, I'd just love to ask you, what does play mean to you personally and professionally?
What does play mean to me? Well, it's kind of everything professionally for me. It's how our children and young people, particularly our very little children, but I extend that to the whole of human experience really, but it's how our little ones experience the world and how they communicate what's going on in the world and in their internal worlds as well. It's, how we form relationships, and it's how we problem solve, and it's how we engage in life. I guess play to me means joy really, and it's how we engage in the world creatively, but just so important if you want to get scientific about it, for our development, our brain development and our relationships. For me, it's foundational. It's not an add-on. It's really a core essence of who we are as mammals, really, as we all know that, mammals, our puppies and our kittens play, and it's no different for us.
It's amazing. We're both on the same wavelength there, definitely. You mentioned that play is how children communicate. Could you tell me a bit more about that and how you see that coming through in your work?
Yes, sure. So it's really at the core of our therapeutic approach. So we offer therapy and counselling. One of the things we offer is therapy and counselling to children and young people in schools. And in our work, we would have a range of different play materials, art materials, books, cosy corners to sit in. So it's really over to the young children and young people to decide on what's most comfortable for them to use. And obviously that's facilitated by our therapists and counsellors in the room, but what's most comfortable and appropriate for them to use to be able to express what's going on for them. So it really is the way that children and young people express themselves. They bring difficult things into awareness and difficult things into the therapeutic space through play and art and music in a way that may for some be too difficult or not fully formed enough to do in words yet. So for me and for children and young people, I think it is, it's really fundamental, obviously, to where they communicate, but I think it's also a way of being able to stay with the really difficult stuff. We get a lot of children and young people presenting with the difficult stuff and difficult experiences. So it's a way of them having a bit of distance from something, being able to engage with something playfully, maybe sort of experiment with like different outcomes, problem solve. So it just offers us a whole new world, really, play.
I suppose it's thinking about that big sort of shift in mindset, really, from thinking what's wrong with this child to what's happened to this child, isn't it? It's that big sort of change, isn't it? So you mentioned that you work closely with schools across Scotland. So what would you say are some of the emotional needs that you're seeing just now from children and young people in schools?
Sure. A whole range of things, really. So anxiety, low mood, depression, on the lighter end of the scale, but, not always, friendship, relationship issues, more generally self-awareness. So, a lot of, we were talking just there about play and communication and how it comes into the work. I think, it's there also for children, young people to form an understanding of what's going on for them, as well as us as adults. Bullying comes into our work, bereavement, loss, change, transition, just all sorts of, I guess, the normal things in life, really. Life comes into our work, anger, conflict, whatever it is, sort of normal life changes and things that, might be slightly outside of the norm as well. So a whole range of different things. And I think that's one of the lovely things about working for an organisation like Place to Be, is that we get the whole range. I always really appreciated that as a young art psychotherapist coming into Place to Be, that, it wasn't just one specialism. Working in schools, you get like the full range of stuff. So everything and anything. And I guess in, on the nicer end of the scale, we get all the lovely joyous stuff that happens, in life as well, in Place to Talk. You might have little ones coming to tell you that they've got, a new pet or a new baby brother and things like that. But all of these things are significant as well. So yeah, we get the whole range of stuff, I guess, Fiona.
That's lovely to hear. It really is, isn't it? It's lovely that your, children are feeling so open they can say things to you.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's so important. You'd mentioned about you coming into, you were sort of coming into schools as an external as well. So, and obviously your Place to Be has that brilliant whole school model, really, that you sort of work with them all. And again, it's not just about supporting children, but obviously working with the staff, the leadership team and parents too. And with yourself as sort of external, obviously we do that as well. The fact that, we work with, it's all around play. Why do you think that joined up approach is so important then?
I just think it's hugely important right throughout, the life cycle of children and young people. I guess a phrase that kind of sticks with me from early on in my training, is that children and young people can only progress as far as the systems around them will allow. So it's so important. I guess, I'm thinking about when we get a young person referred into our service, and we do what we call an assessment and formulation, which is really just like looking at the whole picture, speaking to all the people that feel significant in that child's life. And that process really helps us to kind of identify where the support is most needed, because I guess there's a tendency, children and young people bring the sort of symptoms of their life and the outside world into the school, which we see quite often through their behaviour. But actually, it's not always. And I would argue that it's never solely located within the child, actually, but it's not always located within the child. It's not always that child that's the only person or the person at all, actually, that's needing the support. So it could be that there's something practical even in the environment that just needs a little tweak, and something that perhaps, for example, the teacher wasn't aware of until we've been through that sort of assessment process. And actually doing that assessment is sometimes enough, because you've sort of drawn all the key people together and we've joined our thinking. It's like, oh, something has emerged there. So yeah, I think from that point of view.
I suppose that's it. The thing, isn't it? I found that in, in my practice as well, getting the whole family. Sometimes, when we look at it, we think we're supporting the child, but actually we're not really. We're supporting the child and their families as well. And by supporting the families too, you actually support the child even better. It's getting everybody into the sort of the same headspace, isn't it? And working together. Do you ever find that sometimes families aren't really sort of sure about how play helps? Sort of play therapy is so important, especially when their children are struggling maybe emotionally. So how do you, I know we work with families to help them sort of see the value of play. How do you work with families, to look at the value of play and help them become more confident in playing with their children?
Yeah. It's a good question. I guess when, there's lots of things we can do and lots of things that we do, which I'll maybe elaborate on in a moment. But I'm just thinking about children when they're referred into our service, and what we'd usually do is meet with parents and carers and obviously think together around what's showing up, what particular issues are showing up for children. And I guess that's the first sort of way in, if you like. Quite often what we will do, we'll take them into the place to be room, give them a sense of what that looks like, where their children would be coming, if that's the best place, things that we use. And I think it's back to that question that you asked before, Fiona, around play and communication. It's having those sorts of conversations about how important it is. I guess we have parents that are not necessarily, I guess my experience is that parents and carers are often not necessarily adverse to the model, and actually a lot of parents and carers and teachers quite like the model. It makes sense, particularly with younger ones, that you would use play, you would use art. It's like, oh yeah, well they like those things. So I guess the bit that maybe needs a bit more support is around how to play, and for some parents and carers, due to their own experiences and their own childhoods, that might not come as naturally. There might be other stressors on their lives, which makes that more difficult. So we have something called parent partnership, where we work alongside parents and carers to just really help them understand what their children are communicating through their behaviour and how to sort of join with.
I suppose it's like teaching the parents to play as well, because
yes, how to ring fence, even if it's 15 minutes a day, to do something together that the child might like. And then we've got things like PIP, Fiona, which is where we are working with parents and carers alongside their children.
So I was going to say, I suppose it's like teaching the parents to play as well, because possibly they've never really had a chance to play either.
That's exactly it. You said it in a much more succinct way than I did there.
I think as well, sometimes nowadays as well, there's so much pressure on parents as well to get their play that Pinterest sort of perfect play that, it just is not as, it's totally, sometimes I think social media can be put sort of parents an awful lot of pressure on parents to make their play perfect, where they're getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to cut their children's sandwiches into butterfly shapes and things like that.
Well, I don't do that, Fiona.
I've never done that. I can assure you. You could just ask my children to be. But it's not. It's the thing is, it's about being there for the children. It's not necessarily that performance that you have to do. It's being there, isn't it? It's that presence. So I really like how you were talking there about getting the parents in and working together and having sort of joint activities, which I think is really, that's really, really powerful, isn't it? It really is. So do you think, sort of zoom out a wee bit there, do you think then that schools could be doing more to create that kind of environment where play, wellbeing and relationships really thrive? What would you say would be, apart from obviously having a place to be in with them, what sort of things could they do that would maybe help that environment be a bit more supportive and nurturing?
I see lots of things going on in schools, and even in my own kids' schools, particularly. I think any sort of accessible environment that can friendly, welcoming environment that can be created for family to, access, play spaces with people on hand is a good thing. I think there's various things that I'm just thinking about at my own kids' school. They're not place to be schools, but they're doing things like having.
Why?
Yeah, I know.
Why?
Well, I can't answer that. But it's a good question. But facilitating, particularly sort of outdoor play as well, and messy play. And I think it's just about making it, normalizing it, Fiona, making it welcoming and accessible.
Do you think maybe the problem is when we use the word play, particularly with the older children? We sort of have that thing where I think sometimes we look at play as being sort of for very small children, and it usually involves sand, water, paint, mess. But actually it's possibly teachers and educationalists sort of understanding, and even parents understanding that actually play changes as children grow, really, and it looks different, where play for maybe a primary 1 child might look very, very different than play for a primary 7, or even a child in 1st or 2nd year. Could you imagine play in a high school? But we call it something different. And again, I suppose we all play, but we just call it hobbies and leisure activities.
But we should all play. Yeah.
That's it. We just, as we get older, don't we? We call it something different. So maybe, again, it's that having that space that actually people can be a bit freer when, what they can do, and recognising that, especially I think maybe with teenagers as well, do you find that, do you work a lot with high schools then?
Yes, yeah, and we increasingly actually, work with high schools right across the UK actually. But yeah, I totally agree with you, Fiona. I think it's about creativity to me, and like playfulness, and like a playful mindset, being open to things, holding things lightly in mind and things like that, I guess play can mean lots of different things, like you were saying, as we get older. A lot of our sort of high school age kids, and obviously there's a huge age range, isn't there, between, sort of 11 to 18 and, all the developmental stages that you go through. I guess, something that's maybe an assumption is that as soon as, you go into S1 that, you just don't play anymore. But I mean, of course, it's a bit crazy if you think about it, really, isn't it? That you finish primary school and then you go into S1 and then suddenly you're some sort of like pseudo adult or something like that who doesn't play anymore. So in our rooms, we've just got a range of different things, really. A lot of our older ones, they'll be into the art and being creative that way, or maybe music, even board games. I've seen a lot of like really creative things done with Jenga and emotions and various different things, like ball games. And I guess children, young people, what always really amazes me about them, and I do think it's really important to still play when you're an adult as well, but we can lose it. It's kind of use it or lose it as well with play, What really amazes me about children and young people, and I'm talking about, older teens even, they know what they need to do, really. For example, boys, older boys who have found being in relationship really difficult and have actually made their own games to play, in the place to be room. And it's been the start of that connection, a bit like what we were talking about at the very beginning, that connection in relationship with them and their therapist. And has really we found a way in through that, and they found a way in to communicate their internal world. And, it's just so important, isn't it, to know that you can be connected with somebody and you can use that relationship or other relationships, supportive relationships, when you need them throughout your life.
That's the thing. We know that'll build confidence, resilience as well. But it is getting that hook, isn't it? It's getting that sort of provocation to, to actually get in there and getting those pathways of communication open. Play is such a wonderful thing, and I always think play is such a universal language. You don't have to speak the same language, but everybody can speak play. You see it yourself when you're on holiday and children of all different languages are playing together without sharing the same language, but everybody shares that play as a language, don't they? Which is, even I think it's important, particularly for maybe teenagers who can sort of regress into themselves or become disengaged with school. Play sometimes will be able to open. You can see that it would be able to open that way that you can actually then start to express yourself. Do you find that quite often then? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like, so much of what you're saying is completely resonating with me. I just think, the world of play, it's a world of possibility, isn't it? So anything's possible in the world of play, which problem solving wise and finding new ways forward, finding new creative ways forward that you just wouldn't have thought of if you had been trying to verbalize something or even write something down. So, it just opens up new possibilities, and you're using different parts of your brain, of course, if we want to be scientific about that. In relation to what you were saying with regression and the older ones, and I would say you'll know this yourself, Fiona, with adults as well. There are often, with the young people we are working with, there are often, unresolved traumas from much earlier on, either that, young people are not necessarily consciously aware of, and it might be, a bodily sensation that they've been left with, like a feeling of anxiety or hypervigilance, or something that they are consciously aware of on some level, but it's just been like pushed right down in order to be able to cope and like function to a level in everyday life. And we do still have, very old ones who will play with a baby doll, for example, or regress to almost a much younger state within session in order to attend to that part of self that has experienced pain, I guess, at some point, in order to repair that in some way and attend to that or become aware of it in a safe way.
I think it's one of those things as well that sometimes it's often the children who've the least access to play who actually need it the most, growing up as well, isn't it? And it's one of the few spaces where they can take control, they can make choices, they can feel joy and elation as well through play. And it's so sad when you think that some children have not had the opportunity to experience that through trauma and, situations that have happened to them as they're grown up. Whereas actually it's wonderful to think that you're actually providing this space where actually they can develop and they can, there's always like, you don't make mistakes in play either. Nobody's judging you. To be probably in that space, that open space where that nurturing environment where they're able to just be themselves and play must be really freeing for a lot of the children.
Yeah, freeing and scary, I think, all at the same time for children, that, maybe haven't had the opportunity to play, maybe haven't had the opportunity to be in relationship in that way, and who maybe haven't been closely attended to. It can feel quite odd, I think. So it takes time. It takes time, definitely, but it truly is a wonderful thing. I feel very privileged, to be part of an organisation who is providing such an important space or spaces for children, young people, and the people around them as well,
Would you say then that, have you seen like attendance improving? Obviously we're trying to get children back into school, particularly, so I think post-COVID, and certainly we've got our Play Pedagogy Award, which brings in more learning through play and making, children leading their play and making like school basically a motivating, enjoyable experience for children rather than sort of sitting, getting direct teaching from the front of the class, like where I can think about my own sort of traditional school. And, do you find then that a sort of attendance is better in schools that have got a place to be?
I don't have any sort of figures on that necessarily, Fiona, but I've got lots of stories, like narratives where that's the case. For example, we have young people who, are not attending school or on a part-time timetable or, whatever it is for whatever reason, and who will come in and access their place to be session. And that can often be a way of then sort of building up the time in school. It's a way of reconnecting with the school. And I guess through our work with the teachers as well, because we're always working alongside the teachers and the parents at the same time, it can be a way in for schools to gain more of an understanding about, what are the sort of pull factors. I often think about it as in like pull and push factors, like what are the barriers, for that young person, so we can have more of an understanding. Because I think what you're saying there is, absolutely at the crux of, what we need to be doing as like systematically, particularly within schools, is making our schools a welcoming environments for young people, thinking about what the push factors are as well, what the strengths are, but thinking about the barriers, for individuals, it'll be different for everybody. We've recently been involved in Dundee in an emotionally based school non-attendance project. It was just a really short project, actually, 7 months. And it was open to primary and secondary, but mostly used by secondary pupils, actually. But we've seen some really, it's complex work and it takes time, obviously, but seen some really amazing results with, at least 4 of the young peoples there returning to full-time education. But it really is that approach of, working with the school, working with the young people, working with parents and carers, and I think parents and carers just really appreciated that as well, in terms of, what a difficult position that can be, and knowing what to do and all the rest of it.
So obviously you work in different contexts, so sort of rural, urban. If you think about how would you, how do you sort of personalise that experience for each of the, the children in the schools then?
Yeah. Oh, it's an interesting question. So I guess we just take the time to really understand the context, really, in a really basic way. So that's both within, we're in lots of different contexts. So we're in schools where we've got a practitioner based within the school and we're offering the whole school model. We've got some online projects and some sort of hybrid models in the Highlands, for example, Highlands and Islands. We have got some single point of access services, so where referrals will come into a central point and we'll look at it sometimes and sometimes not, with like a wider team, with CAMS, with social work, with other third sector organisations, and then sort of divvy that up as to what's most appropriate. So we've got a whole, and like you say, like a whole different range of, we're in different cities, different locations, different sizes of schools, things like that. So I guess to answer it really basically, it's just really always trying to understand the context and then, how that affects children and young people and what they bring in and how we have to adapt our approach and all the rest of it. But I don't know if that answers your question entirely, but
it definitely does. I suppose it's the fact that you've been doing it for 30 years, as an organisation, you'll have worked out what works and what doesn't.
Well, we're always learning, Fiona. I would say, it's a constant working with people. It's a lifelong and beyond, like learning, isn't it? So I guess both within the work with individual children, but also as an organisation, we're a learning organisation. So we're always reviewing and, looking at, whether we're providing the best possible service that we could be. What do we need to tweak? What do we need to adapt? And as the landscape changes around us, you've mentioned attendance, being one of the big themes out there. We've got things like dysregulation. We've got like increased need and waiting lists, and once a diagnosis for, neurodiverse children, young people. So we're always adapting what we do to fit, and then within the sort of constraints of the financial landscape as well, Yeah, always learning.
Yeah, I think we're all, aren't we? We all were in the same boat there with the financial landscape, unfortunately.
Yes,
as much as we would love to be able to do everything, it's just not possible, unfortunately.
I guess that context is everything, isn't it? Because they're all contexts that, children and young people, we're talking about them bringing the symptoms of, the family, but also society in, and things like poverty, for example, they're really big. If we take it right back down to play, they're biggies, aren't they, in terms of how it affects, parents and carers, how it affects children and their ability to engage with play, for example, and a whole host of other things.
So, Becky, with children returning to school imminently, is there things that parents or practitioners or educators can do to help prepare and support their children for going back to school?
I think that, when we're talking about returning to school, what we're really talking about is change and transition, isn't it? So I think, in terms of life and life skills, change is a constant, isn't it? But I think by a definition of transition is something that, takes place internally. So you can have change without the transition bit. And that's when we kind of run into problems. I would say, first of all, that, it's totally normal. That would be my first bit of advice, would be normalizing feelings rather than trying to minimize feelings. Change and transition is unsettling. We sort of crave predictability, and structure. Even as adults, we crave that, consistency. So I guess there's something I really like. There's a model from somebody called William Bridges, he's an American author and an expert on sort of change and the world of business, really. And he's got three stages to transition. He's got endings. He's got what he calls the neutral zone, which is like the in-between bit. And then he's got new beginnings. So the theory is that you can't move on to the new bit until you've acknowledged and you've dealt with the ending. And when you were at the stage where you were kind of looking forward to the new beginning, so if we're thinking about going back to school, that you've come through the neutral zone and you're ready for that new beginning. For me, in terms of, providing some top tips, I guess, would be something around normalizing feelings. So not minimizing that, it's a complex old thing, can throw up all sorts of things for individuals. And as parents and carers, your children best and what that might throw up. There might be something in there around sharing. So not minimizing their feelings, but sharing the ways that you've coped with change, so experiences of change that you've had and that you've found unsettling, and a way to normalize but also help young people to see that there are potential ways through. There's hope. Something about honouring endings. So if we think about that William Bridges stuff, it's really thinking about, what were the really, lovely things in primary 3? Can you remember some of your favourite things in primary 3 and really sort of honouring those and like making memories and then preparing for new beginnings? So everything that you can do if you've got a particularly anxious child or young person to prepare them. So, can you take a walk up to the school and where the new classroom is going to be? Do we know who the new teacher is going to be? Pictures, things like this. Anything that you can do to sort of prepare them. I know that at my daughter's high school, for example, they had a virtual tour, so we looked at that a couple of times. And also thinking about, there's things that are going to be different, but there's lots of things that are going to be the same as well. So thinking about those together, really.
Do you think we sometimes focus so much on the big transitions, these big sort of horizontal transitions from nursery to primary, from primary to, to high school. But we sometimes forget a bit about what you were saying, sort of what did you do in primary 3? Sometimes these can be quite big transitions as well, can't they? From going from primary 3 to primary 4.
It can be huge. And, you'll know as well as I do, Fiona, moving from, for example, primary 3 to primary 4, it might be that there's a whole different configuration of kids as well. Some kids have gone to a different class and all the rest of it, and not knowing what the teacher's going to be like and what the space is going to be like. And I guess, transitions is a big one, and I think it's really back to you knowing your own child, because for some and for schools, thinking about transition individually as well. I think we can minimize, what seemingly small sort of changes, the impact that can have, even moving, from break into the next lesson, or it's really thinking about those individual children and how transitions and change might affect them, really.
From my own experience, I always used to, because I worked in early years for a long time, and I always used to look at things that actually can make children really anxious, like finding out where to go to the toilet, finding out where to hang up their coat, lunchtime, all these things, and I think I used to do like little sort of, I would take, luckily a lot of our children in the nursery went on to our primary school. So you were actually able to take them in and show them whenever everybody else was out, so that it's not overwhelming. But sometimes it's good to have little, taking photographs and things.
Yeah,
and just,
it's a great idea.
This is where you go to the toilet. This is where you'll have your lunch. This is the routine. You wait there and take them through the routine. Sometimes just preparing children, can make such a difference to their level of anxiety. So important, isn't it?
Seemingly small things, isn't it? And I guess it's to that piece around empowering children and their sense of agency and control and all of that, isn't it?
Because I suppose even when you think about it as an adult, if you have to go somewhere new and, maybe you have to drive there, you have to park the car, you have to find out how to get into the building. All these things are actually quite stressful for an adult. So for a child, that must be just so much more stressful.
Exactly. And I was thinking exactly that, actually, when you asked me the question, and these are, like I was saying, they're normal. Change is going to happen, isn't it? The only constant thing is change, I think somebody said, didn't they? So it's helping our children to normalise that, change can cause and does cause anxiety in all of us. But these are some of the things that I do. What do you do as well? Be curious. There'll be things that they've already developed in terms of coping strategies, what's helping you now and what might help you. Staying curious.
Would you help parents with that? Would you help them give think about strategies and stuff? Yeah.
For sure. And teachers and schools as well. I guess as you get more accustomed to change, you sort of think that the littler things, they're not so much of a big deal, are they, whereas for our little ones and our young people, they're doing it, for the first time quite often, so they're still learning, aren't they, and developing. So yeah, it's a really important part of our work. Yeah.
So I've got one final question to ask you, Becky. We've been talking a lot today about mental health and play. So if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about how we support children's mental health through play, what would you do?
I would equip parents, carers, the systems around children, young people, so schools, to be able to really listen and relate to children, young people, but really be able to listen and join in relationship so that they can creatively empower children and young people to find the best way forward for them.
Thank you. What a wonderful answer to finish on. So positive. I think we could probably talk about this all day, couldn't we?
I think we could.
So it's been really, really wonderful to speak to you, Becky, today and find out a bit more about the work of Place to Be, your experience and just basically the changes that you're making, in schools and to families and children for their mental health. So I look forward to catching up with you again. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for joining us on this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on your preferred app. To find out more about Play Scotland, please follow us on Blue Sky and visit our website at playscotland.org.uk.